Okay, welcome to your second CSS3 tutorial. In this tutorial, we will be covering the CSS3 text shadow property. Now, this text shadow property falls under the CSS3 text module. Now, remember from our previous tutorial that I explained that CSS3 is broken up into modules. Okay, so the first module we will be covering is the CSS3 text module, and the first property we will be covering under that module is the CSS3 text shadow property. Okay, now to explain the CSS3 text shadow, you must first understand the Cartesian coordinate system, because that is the system under which text shadow is modeled after. So we're going to say, let's create an element on the page here. Okay, let's create this element, h1 element, and let's give this h1 element a style. Let's say font size, not even spelling this correctly, font size. Okay, font size, let's give it 200 pixels. Okay, Control S to preview this. This is our element. Now, to explain the Cartesian coordinate system, let's pull up our paint program right here. Okay, let me increase the size of this. Now, remember from mathematics, with the Cartesian coordinate system, it's the xy. We have the xy axis, right? Okay, and this is the x, and this right here is the y. Okay, now if we want to find any point on this system, right, we can move towards the x, right, and we can move towards the right, the x left. Okay, now we could also move upwards on the y axis, and we could also move downwards on the y-axis as well to find any point on that system. Now remember from mathematics that towards the right on the x-axis is positive, and towards the left on the x-axis is negative, and towards downwards on the y-axis is negative, and upwards on the y-axis is positive. However, under the CSS text module, upwards on the y is negative, and downwards on the y is positive. So you must bear that in mind. And the origin of the system being right here, that is 0. Now the origin on any CSS element is towards the top left hand corner right here, which is going to be 0. So if we want to move, we could move the shadow towards the left, towards the right, sorry, or we can move the shadow downwards, or we can move the shadow upwards, or we can move the shadow towards the left. Towards the left here is negative. Okay, now remember on the CSS, towards upwards right here is negative as well, and downwards is positive. Okay, so that in mind, let's close this out. Okay, so let's add our first text shadow property. So we're going to say text shadow to this. We're going to add the property to this h1 element. We're going to say text shadow. Now remember from mathematics, to the way we write out the points, right, we say x, y, right, x on the x. So we're going to move on the x-axis and also the y-axis. The same thing in CSS. So under the x, along the x-axis, we're going to say, let's say 0 to keep it at the origin on the x-axis. Okay, and let's take this comma out. We don't put in commas on the CSS. And towards the y, let's say we want to push this shadow downwards. Okay, so we're going to say a positive 5 pixels. Okay, and let's give it a color of gray. Okay, so let's Control S to save this, preview this in the browser. As you can see here, we have a text shadow. It's at the origin on the X. However, on the Y, it's pushed downwards 5 pixels. As you can see here, we can push it upwards, right, by simply making it negative, and we can push it upwards as well. If we want to push it to the left, we have to change the X value. So the X offset value, which is we say negative 5 pixels, we can push it 5 pixels to the left and 5 pixels upwards. As you can see here, it's pushed 5 pixels to the left and 5 pixels upwards as well, or we could push it 5 pixels to the left and 5 pixels downwards as well. As you can see here, we pushed it 5 pixels downwards as well. And let's put it back. Let's put it back to 0 on the X, and let's say 5 on the Y. As you can see here, we pushed it down. Okay, now there is also a third offset. This is the X offset, this is the Y offset. There's also a third offset called the blur radius. Now the blur radius, like the name implies, adds a blur effect to the shadow. Now it takes a pixel value, or whatever. It takes a pixel value as well. You can put in a pixel or percentage, right? So, but we're gonna use pixels. So you can take a pixel value of, let's say, 3 pixels, right? And the higher the value, the more blur the element, the shadow. So as you can see here, it looks a little blur. We can make it even blur, if that's a word, blur, right? So we can make it blur, like I said. So we could make it, let's say, 10 pixels. We can make it 10 pixels. As you can see here, it's a little blur as well, right? So we can, let's put it back to 2 pixels. Okay, as you can see here. Now one interesting effect we can do with the text shadow, let's with the blur radius, let's do text shadow. One interesting effect we can do with the blur radius, we can make let's say it's 0 pixels from the left, right, and 0 pixels from the towards the 0 pixels on the X, sorry, and 0 pixels on the Y, and let's give it a blur radius of 2 pixels, and let's make it a color of gray, right? And let's make this element, the H1 element, the color of the H1 element, let's make it gray. Let's make it white as well. Sorry, white, 6x. Okay. As you can see here, this is another interesting effect we can do with the blur radius as well. Okay, let's make this a little thicker. Okay. So let's add one other effect that we can do with the text shadow is we can add multiple shadows as well. So apart from this first one, we could add another one separated by a comma, and we could say let's say 0 on the Y. Let's say 4 pixels on the X, right? I'm sorry, 0 on the X. This is 1. I'm mixing up things. We say 0 on the X, right? 4 pixels on the Y, which is going downwards, right? A blur radius of 0, and let's give it a color of black. Control S to save. Okay, as you can see here, this is one shadow we put. This is another shadow we put on top of the first shadow. We could add even another shadow on that as well. So we could say 0. Let's say 0 on the X, and let's say 8 pixels on the Y, and let's give it a color of let's say blue for the color, and let's give it a blur radius of 0. Control S to save. And let's preview it. As you can see here, we added another shadow. We could go on and on and on. We could add even another shadow to this. Let's say let's change around the X-axis. Let's say 4 pixels on the X, and let's say 10 pixels on the Y, just to show the possibilities of this text shadow property. 10 pixels on the Y. Let's give it a blur radius of 5 pixels, and let's give it a color, interesting color of red. Control S to save, and as you can see, we could add another text shadow. So we could add multiple shadows going on and on and on. Okay. Now another interesting effect we can do with the text shadow, we can add an engraving looking color to the text shadow. Make the element, the text, look like it is pressed in or engraved into the document. Okay, now to do this, let's change the background color of the page. Let's say body background color. Let's give it a background color of a grayish color. So we're gonna say 565656. Control S to save. And let's give the element, the H1 element, a color as well. So let's give it a color of 3. Let's say 3333. Okay, the font size, let's make the font a little bigger so we can see it fully. Control S. Okay, now we have this font here. Now we can make like I said, an engraving kind of look to it. So we need to add the text shadow now. So we're gonna say text shadow. Now it's going to be multiple shadows, so it's going to be 2 shadows in fact. So text shadow, the first shadow we're gonna put is gonna be 0 on the X, right? Let's put 2 pixels. Let's put 4 pixels. Make it bigger. Let's put 4 pixels on the Y and 0 for the blur radius, and let's give it a color of 777. And let's add another shadow. We're gonna say 0 on the X. Let's say minus 4 pixels on the right. On the Y, sorry, and 0 for the blur radius, and let's give it a color of black. Control S to save, and let's preview this. As you can see here, enlarging this, it's a kind of engraving kind of look on the element. Okay, so this is our text shadow property, our first property we covered under the text module. Okay, so we will be covering further properties in further tutorials, other properties in further tutorials. Okay, so thank you for watching this tutorial, and do ensure that you subscribe, and I will see you in further tutorials. Thank you.